All right, welcome to the August edition of the Disability Ministry Video Roundtable. And our topic today is potty talk. So we are going to just talk through some of the toileting policies and procedures at your church. And I know it sounds like kind of a funny thing to talk about, but like it's a fact of life. And so how can we be honoring to our individuals who may need assistance in the restroom, to our volunteers or staff or members of the congregation who may need to provide that assistance. I know you all have questions because I work at a church and I have questions too. So we're just going to have a discussion. We have some people here today who have some really great expertise that they'll be sharing, but this is a discussion. So would anybody like to open up with a question? Everybody's nervous. All right, well then I'm gonna switch this around then. I'm actually gonna tap on Ryan. So Ryan Wolfe from Disability Ministry is such a great resource for us for a couple of reasons, and I'm going to let him tell you. He even has a book about this. So, and so I think maybe if you can kind of set the big scene for us, and then I think that'll generate some questions and some comments. Is that okay, Ryan?
That's fine. Yeah, that's cool. All right, cool. Let me start. And I know there's about half and half have video on and half don't. But even if you don't have your video on, if you could use like the raised hand icon, just like to do a real quick informal survey here. At your church, here's the question. At your church, do you have a universal sized changing table? So raise of hands if you do, or like give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you don't have your video on. So I'm seeing, help me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, maybe 5. Okay, all right, that's good. All right, so out of what we got, 21 people here, we've got 4, maybe 5, so that's 25% of the churches represented here do have a universal size change table. So kind of good to know. It's kind of a good awareness thing. So we are the churches that get disability ministry or are helping and efforting towards reaching out to our disability communities and being inclusive, setting a place of belonging. And of ours, we got about 25% of the churches with universal size change tables. So what does that tell you for churches that kind of don't get this conversation? What's the percentage? Probably maybe 5%. would probably be my guess on that. We believe Ability Ministry, I'm sure you guys as well, having a universal size changing table is a must, an absolute must. I know that there are difficulties when it comes to existing churches having the space for it, having the funding for it, having all of that for it. But think of what it communicates to a family that has either a loved one, child, an individual that requires personal care in the restroom. When they come in there and maybe there's an icon on a family restroom door that says universal size change table here, or just think about what that communicates. It communicates that they are valued, that they've been thought of, that they're accepted, that they want them to be there. As we know, most churches don't have that as an option, and that's one thing that we really want churches to think about. We've created a resource. Beth mentioned that we have a book. I know it may be hard with my screen filter here. It's called The Tale of the Shrinking Toilets. It's an allegory that talks about a world that becomes inaccessible when all the public restroom toilets shrink down to infant size. So we try to make not necessarily make light of the situation, but try to have this conversation that's a difficult conversation to have by telling the story to help open people's eyes to a hidden epidemic that most people just aren't aware of. So if you're interested in the story, I'll paste here in the chat section. We created a website for our book and for our initiative. So you can go there and learn a little bit more about the book, order the book. 100% of the proceeds of the book go to a scholarship fund that we've created for churches that want to build or purchase a universal size changing table. Will help pay for it with some of the funds that we've raised from the book sales. So my encouragement for churches is always go the extra mile. Again, it's not easy, especially with existing buildings with small rooms. Maybe you're taking a family restroom that does have the space for it and you're installing one. Or maybe you're using an extra classroom or somewhere else that has space. Even if you can't have a permanent option, you can do things like having a adjustable folding table that somebody would use for massages. There are options that you can use to have available in your church, for those situations where a family comes and they have a child or a loved one that requires personal care in the restroom. So even if it's not an option to have a permanent universal size change table, I would encourage you to get one that you can move around and put in spaces and have available on hand. So again, we think it's super important to have that option available, and that's just it's something we're passionate about. Not many people talk about it because it's bathroom talk, but I have the maturity of a middle school boy still as an adult, so I don't fear too much of that potty talk. So that'll just kind of start the conversation. We'll let it roll from there. I saw a hand up. Is it Trace?
So we have one. We don't have a great place to put it. We have like a couple of all gender bathrooms, but they're single stall and just not big enough to put the table in there. Right now we've got it like in our kids' sensory space, kind of like cornered off, but I feel like that's not thoughtful for our adults that might need that, to have them go into the kids wing. And I just haven't come up with a great place to put it if it doesn't fit in our small single stall bathrooms. What do you think?
Beth has an idea.
Well, this is not a great idea, but here's what we're doing. Do your single stall restrooms, are there two of them close together? No. Okay. I'll tell you what our church is doing, and I have to kind of laugh. That's why I sort of raised my hand. Literally today, and it's actually could happen at any second, in which case I'll mute myself, but they're coming with jackhammers because we're creating a fully accessible restroom with a universal size changing table. And the jackhammers are coming today to remove a wall. So we're taking an existing huge closet, portioning it off, making a doorway where there used to not be a doorway. So this will be the restroom, and then we'll still have a closet. So I guess what I was saying is maybe, and I know that that adds a cost to this that, but maybe think outside the walls, if you will. Like maybe there's like a closet that can be combined or converted or something.
We've got like 3 at our church. In one of the areas, we used a storage closet. And I know storage is like premium at all churches, but we felt it important enough to give up a storage closet for that. So we have a universal size changing table, and we have a Hoyer lift in that space because it's a little bit larger than some of our family restrooms where we have our other ones. But that Hoyer lift is super important. It gets utilized a lot at our day program. It's on the same floor that our day program is. But yeah, I'd say look at storage closets, and it's probably easier to purchase a shed and move stuff out of a storage closet into a shed to free up space than it is to maybe move walls. If you have a storage closet, that would work.
Dina.
I just want to add, especially for people who are not familiar with exactly what we're talking about, so I am in the children's ministry at my church, but I also have a daughter who has severe physical disabilities, who is 16 years old and diapered, and has been advocating for my church to have a place for me to change her for over a decade. But one of the things you have to consider when you're thinking, okay, I need a space that this table fits in, but you also have to consider who's using the table, and you need space as well for a wheelchair. So you can fit the table in there, but if you can't get the wheelchair in there, the door opens the wrong way or whatever. There's a lot of, it's not just as easy as finding a place for that table to fit. So when you're considering those spaces, you have to consider all those things. My church's answer was to make a bigger bathroom stall that the door opens the wrong way. I can't even get the wheelchair in there anyway. So, that's just one thing I just wanted to add, that if you're thinking, oh, I have to find a place for a table, the space needs to be, I think they're saying, what is it, 5 by 5 for a wheelchair space, for a wheelchair to actually have space to turn around. So just wanted you to add that to the consideration when you're thinking of space.
Thank you, Dina, for your perspective and your experience, and for bringing that up. And yes, so the other thing is, I think you brought up a super great point, like guessing about the accessibility and usefulness is not a really great plan. And so bring people to the planning process who, this is part of their experience. This is part of their life experience, either as, somebody who uses it, or, a parent or caregiver, or, there's accessibility checklists. Have somebody who is a wheelchair user take a spin and try it out, and can they maneuver? And because, sitting here at a computer trying to, make decisions, you don't know. So thank you, Dina, for bringing that up. And anybody else? Catherine? Oh, you didn't have your hand up. You were just like, yeah, preach. Okay.
I would say another space option. I know some larger churches have like massive bathrooms with just like rows of stalls. So maybe instead of, tearing down a wall, maybe you take out 2 or 3 stalls in that space and make one large space that would create enough space for the wheelchair and the changing table. Yeah, you'd be giving up a couple of toilets and stalls, but that would be another option as well.
Yeah, that's good. There's a comment or question and comment in the chat. So let me read those, because those, for people that watch the replay, they can't see the chat. So first of all, just to backtrack, shrinkingtoilets.com is the website, and we will put that in the show notes with the recording on Vimeo and YouTube and the keyministry.org website. But the question is, when you say the door swings the wrong way for the wheelchair, which way is wrong? That's a great question. So if the wheelchair can go in, but you can't shut the door, that's the wrong way. So the door needs to open out. Is that correct? I'm doing that right. Yeah. I'm looking at myself backwards on here. So yes, the door needs to open out. I've also seen sliding doors, as long, again, like, don't guess at it. Make sure that it actually passes the accessibility test by a user. There are checklists for what actually works. And so make sure to refer to those. Dina.
So you're going to tell that I have a little bit of a passion for this, but I just want to tag on to what Ryan just said. And when you're taking away a couple of bathroom stalls, you're probably not going to lose parishioners because you took away a bathroom. However, when you create a space for people with disabilities that they can come and toilet safely, you are opening the doors for so many people. We have millions of people in the United States with disabilities. And are we meeting their needs? Are we opening our doors to them? And that's kind of what I went to my church with. I'm like, look, you're closing your doors to all these people. My daughter's 16 years old and I have to leave church functions because I have no place to take care of her.
Yeah. I mean, there's no words, like, it's hard to follow that up. Yeah. You're getting some hearts out there, Dina. All right, we have something in the chat, so I'll read it. Okay, so we have someone joining us and her background is too loud to unmute right now. So she just began her position this summer and she has a couple questions. Number one, what questions should we ask the church's insurance when it comes to lifts/hoists, who to charge, who to lift, etc.? Two, if we have the budget, would it be better to purchase a cheaper changing table and a lift or hoist, or start with a better quality changing table without a lift? There is a current need of an elderly couple who is changing their adult daughter in their van that has a lift in their parking lot, and we want to meet the need as quickly as we can. Thank you so very much. So here's somebody who they have a need. So we have churches who some of us may have maybe doing this for a need that we don't currently have, but we know is out there. They have a current need. So who would like to, can anybody address the question about what questions to ask the church's insurance? I'm not an expert in this, so I'm not going to answer.
I would just ask the insurance if there is any increased liability with having a changing table, and see what they say.
I
I don't believe there is any.
Yeah.
As my experience with our church, I'm not aware that there is any increased liability. To the second question, I would, if there's budget and there's money, I would buy one that's adjustable instead of buying a lift, because when you've got a lift, you've got to go into training for the lift. You got to have people who are certified to do that. You're not just going to throw anybody in there and say, hey, let's throw somebody in this lift and guess on how to operate it.
Right. And Ryan, I know, because you and I have talked about, what type of changing table to get. And I know something you shared with me, and this would certainly be the case in, this question that's posed there, but a changing table that you can adjust like mechanically, automatically, pneumatically, I don't know, but is a lot easier for, like people my age and older, who are the ones that are probably changing their adult children, than, having to, something that's not completely adjustable. So if you have the budget to go for, Dina, would you agree, like in your experience? Because
Yes, absolutely. You got to save your back as much as you can as a caregiver. And
Mhm.
if a person can transfer, meaning they stand up from their wheelchair, pivot and sit on a table and lay down, then you can raise it up to do whatever you need to do and then put it back down. You're being safe. It's a safer environment for everyone.
Mhm. Yeah. And again, those cost more obviously than a stationary changing table, but check out the grants that Ability Ministry is offering. There's a question in the chat or a statement. We've discussed taking out stalls at our church. One concern discussed was what happens when the one needing the changing table is the opposite gender of the caregiver. Which restroom do they use? My opinion on this is you label it appropriately, that it's a family restroom with a universal changing table. I mean, I think I don't know. My suggestion would be just to convert it to a family restroom, but okay, who else?
Yeah, I think maybe the question is if it's in like a larger restroom and you only have the option to put it in a men's
Okay.
restroom or a women's restroom, what's the appropriate thing to do? That's a tough question. I would probably put it in the women's restroom. I mean, that's just kind of my initial thought. When we came up with some policies at our church, our policy is that women do the personal care, not men. So we have like a women only policy unless it's something that is, requested, signed off on by the family as a preference. So I would lean towards the women's restroom if that's the only option.
And I wonder if there would be a way when it is in use, if it can, like if there's a sign that you can flip over or something that just makes it closed during the time that a family's using it. I don't know.
Or if it is a larger, like I keep referencing like the bathrooms at my church because there's like literally like 10 stalls in each, the men's and the women's, but and so there's also two doors. There's a door on each end. So maybe you put the sign up on the one end and you pull a curtain at the end of the stalls to give it some privacy and cut it off if that's the kind of the only option that you've got, and you can't put it in a family restroom instead.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of switch gears for a second and talk about some other toileting policies. And we can certainly come back to, to what we've been talking about so far. But what type of okay, how many of you are kind of in the children's ministry world? Like, is your disability, is your so not a ton of you, but a few of you. I guess where I'm going with this is, do you have policies in place do you have restroom policies in place for children's ministry? And then if you're part of a larger disability ministry context with adults, do you have a restroom policy there? And I guess what I'm thinking about is, if someone needs assistance in the restroom, who does it? Does anybody want to share what your policy is? Do you have a policy? Do you think you need a policy? Yes, Amy.
So the policy across the board is 2 are always with the child. You're never alone with a child, even with the bathroom doors open. And that works. But with our special needs, littler ones, if they come to a hallway that the kids' policy is they need to be potty trained, we sit and work with mom and dad and just say, this is what it is. We don't really have a place to change them. Is it okay if we text you if something goes wrong? Now, there has been some where we quickly, 3 of us in the sensory room, changed a wet pull-up when the child has taken it off and thrown it across the room because there's not time to text. But most of the time, parents are very willing to come out and help, change a child and go right back in. So I don't know if that helps at all, but that's what we do.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Anybody else? Barb.
Yeah, so in our church, we've been doing disability ministry since 2014, and the majority of our students have autism, several with significant nonverbal autism. And some of those kids now are bigger. They're boys, they're bigger than most of our volunteers. So we have a bathroom policy for children's ministry, then we have an adapted restroom policy for our special needs ministry. And that policy for us was, if a child needs physical help in the bathroom, like either with taking care of their personal needs or they need a change, then we page the parents to do that. If they just need verbal prompting, then we have a policy where we have the door to the bathroom open, where our ministry partner is in there giving verbal prompts. And then some of our kids are completely independent. What we found was we learned a lot about the restroom we were not expecting. Because when you kind of go into the whole restroom thing in disability, you kind of think like, is the child potty trained or not? And when you learn is what is your definition of what is being independent in the toilet and what a parent's definition is different. And we found a lot of our kiddos on the spectrum who have sensory issues also had differences in what they are comfortable with privacy wise. So what we do in ours is one of the big questions we have, if a child is going to be in our one-on-one buddy program or in our sensory friendly classroom, then we have that restroom conversation right up front with the parents immediately. And we write out a plan for that child and we share it with everyone who works with that child. So there's never a question. And that has worked out really well. And even when we've had some difficulties with that privacy issue, then we could come to the parent and with the church leadership, and we've all met together and come up with a new plan.
I like that.
I think that's I think that's really good. We developed an intake form, an info sheet, and one of the questions on there is restroom needs. So it has a place for you to either check independent, diaper, okay, needs supervision, or write in what the plan is or what's acceptable or what's the desired plan from the family and from the individuals. I'll throw a link to that form in the chat.
Beth.
So we are new to starting up a special needs ministry. And so one of we're writing job descriptions for the volunteers. And of course, one of the things is toileting assistance. I have a teenage 18-year-old with multiple disabilities. And so even though this is not my ministry area, I am like the one who's always raising the red flag and in every conversation. But there's the fear of putting that terminology in a job description and scaring volunteers off. So we don't want to scare them off, but we also want to be upfront because it's going to happen. It's part of our life. It's how we handle things. And one of our goals is to not have to have the parents, coming back. That's one of our goals, is to give the parents a break and let them have their time and let the students have their time. So how do you balance that with being upfront and honest, but yet not scaring people off?
I think you have to really take in consideration what can you do, what is realistic for your church, because that's different depending on the size of the church. If you go to a mega church, you may have enough volunteers that you can find plenty of people that be happy to do that. If you go to a small church, that is not realistic. So you want to think about it from the point of view of what will help your ministry overall, and then also what is the most fair to the family. And what's most fair to the family is that they have consistency. So you really want to have these conversations with your church staff before you write your plans, and invite the families in ahead of time and ask, what do you think? I don't think it's a black or white answer. For our church, we're probably a smaller church than most of the churches in this video chat. And that was another reason why our policy is, if you're physically working with a child, then we just page a parent, because I knew that would keep us from getting the volunteers that we need. And then we wouldn't have our ministry at all. So for us, that was a consideration. And we just tell the parents up front. We have never had a problem with a parent saying, that's not okay. I think as long as people understand expectations in the beginning and they can make a decision, does that work for them or not, then you can do what's right. I think it's worse to promise something you can't actually fulfill. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, that's good.
I think it's also okay to ask volunteers, like if you've got a volunteer application, to put a checkbox on there. Are you comfortable doing personal care? Yes, no. Because there may be some people that, maybe they do that professionally, and they're okay with that. So I think it's okay to put it on a volunteer application.
And I know for some churches, there are, the ministry is totally volunteer. For some, their staff. And so I know with some of those churches, it's a staff responsibility, not a volunteer responsibility. So.
Could I say one more quick thing on
Yeah,
that?
absolutely.
Okay, I think just also to be consider, always know that you can throw an audible in if you need to. So because it's just a big difference if you're talking about personal care with a larger child or a smaller child who maybe has a physical disability that needs that care, or you're talking about personal care with an adult-sized male with significant autism. And so you want to always think from your volunteer's perspective, would they be able to do this? So be prepared if your policy really isn't appropriate for one student, to know how to have those conversations with the family and with the church staff. Because the most important thing about restroom policy is the church staff, the volunteers, and the family are all on the same page.
Mhm.
That's just the number one thing. Okay, that's my last thing.
No, keep them coming. Yeah, and we just want to be honoring to both the individual who needs the assistance and the people who are giving the assistance. So I'm going to throw out a situation, and I know this is one that a couple of us have talked about before, but so we, like this last little chunk, we've kind of been talking more about kids who need assistance, but let's talk about adults who need assistance. So, and I know that might not be the context for everybody, but let's say you're hosting an event for adults and the caregivers aren't present. What are your thoughts? I know Ryan, we've talked, and Amy, I know we've talked about this before. And let's say you haven't had the conversation ahead of time with the caregivers. Any thoughts?
I think again, it comes down to event planning, being clear in your communication. If you're going to have an event where a caregiver is not required to be present, you need to be able to state up front in communication what you and your church's policy is, like what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. You just got to be upfront about it. If you find yourself in a bad situation where it's slipped kind of your thought process, and you find yourself, needing to make an audible, it's one of those situations where your choices are, you call the caregiver, and who knows how far away or how long they are away. It's probably always the best policy is to call the caregiver in that situation, and say, what do you want us to do? Are you able to get here and help? Are you okay with us, trying to take care of it? And then the situation is, do you have the supplies necessary on hand? So you could get yourself in a tough spot if you haven't thought through some of those things. But I would just say, come up with your policy. Don't apologize for your policy. Stick by your policy. Communicate your policy thoroughly if you're doing a big event, so everybody knows what's going to happen if said situation happens.
Good, thank you.
But I would also say always have multiple different sizes of diapers available, wipes, gloves. Just have that on hand anyway. Make that a part of your yearly budget to have that on hand. Changes the clothes. I can't tell you how many times we've had to go to our clothing ministry in certain situations and had to have taken, clothing and help people out. So just make sure you always, in disability ministry, make sure you always have that stuff on hand. Make that a part of your yearly budget to have the supplies available, because it will happen, and you won't always be prepared otherwise.
Good advice. All right, what other questions or thoughts do you have? Looking around for raised hands. Yes, Dina.
So coming from the parent's perspective, and as you're talking about communication, and I know some of you, I think are thinking, oh my gosh, we have to communicate all this stuff. There's so much stuff. As a parent with 2 children with disabilities, one has some severe learning disabilities and is not on the spectrum, but has a lot of autistic tendencies. And then I have my other daughter that has the severe physical disabilities. So I've been in both situations where, as a caregiver, I have let my daughter with the learning disabilities go into situations. She's almost 20. And I have to, it's my job to communicate to whomever I'm leaving her with, here's what you're dealing with, and here's how you get a hold of me when you need me. So caregivers should be trained to do that. Not all of them do. I'll be right up front with you about that. But I think keeping frank and open communication is very important. And caregivers are used to having weird conversations. I mean, I'm used to talking about my 16-year-old's toileting issues because that's just part of what we deal with. So it might be strange to you, but it's something that they deal with all the time. So having those frank conversations are something that shouldn't shy away from so much. Just coming from a parent's perspective on that. So, it's communication is an issue, but I also want to tag on, when you are talking to a caregiver, especially a parent of a special needs person, whether it's an adult or a child, I want you to remember that the system is stacked against them. So they get combative very quickly. We have so many doors shut in our face, so much red tape to go through, that sometimes our defenses come up way too quickly. And so I just want to encourage you that when you come to a parent that is like that with you, when you want to have a frank discussion with them, just take a step back and realize that they have probably had this discussion or just got off the phone with insurance after 3 days of fighting the insurance or whatever. So just remember that they are, unfortunately, as a parent of special needs kids, I have to put on my boxing gloves way too often. And so when they get defensive with you, whatever the conversation is, that is probably why their defenses just come up way too quickly, and they probably don't need to. So extending grace and mercy is a big part of dealing with caregivers.
Thank you, Dina.
I appreciate this whole discussion. I just want you to know.
We appreciate you being on here today, because you've brought a very important voice into this. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for also extending grace as we're trying to learn best practices too. So really appreciate you being here. Any other parents want to talk about the best way to approach this, or like if you're a parent or caregiver, or any other questions or situations that you're seeing at your church? Did we cover it all? Yes, Beth.
I think it's important, and that you go back to the parent communication, especially startups, as we are, is asking the parents. So often, churches will want to start these ministries and they get all the bells and whistles, but they forget to actually ask the parents of what they need or what they want. And so really taking a step back from and letting the community that you already have in your churches that you know of and building from inside out instead of going from outside in. And I'm trying to roll our team into, they're thinking big and global. I'm like, no, just start with who we have. Let's start small and do it well. And if we do that well, people will come because as you know, people in the special needs community, we talk a lot to each other and are constantly sharing resources, and the word will get out. But focus small first on the people that are already in your church and ask them what they want, what they need. They'll tell you because it's so often people don't even ask us what we need for our kids.
Yeah, thank you. That's important for everybody to hear.
Beth?
Yes.
Hi. Oh, did I jump
There you
over?
are, Candy. Hi.
I'm sorry, I jumped on late. I just wanted to share two things, and you guys might have already talked about them already. I'm familiar with one church in our area that does a wonderful respite program. And they take care of the whole toileting situation by charging a very small fee to the families as they come in, and then they hire, depending on this, how many kids they have, 1 or 2 nurses on hand. And those nurses take care of all the toileting and all the needs that evening then. Like I said, you may have already talked about that. I'm from a church that is evolving, if you want to use that word. We don't have the money to create a family restroom, if you will. But I think it's really important, just as we look at our families and what their needs are, to see what's available within our church buildings that we have that they can use. So just on 2 completely different spectrums, I had a family that has twins with cerebral palsy that needed to toilet their daughters in between church and Sunday school. And I had a lovely wife whose husband had Parkinson's disease and needed help in the bathroom all of the time. So like I said, we didn't have a family bathroom, but we had a private bathroom in our nursery area. Not ideal, I know, but it did give them the option where they could go in and be with their loved one and help them with whatever their needs may be. So sometimes we have to look at what we have and work with that until we have what we're dreaming of, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And thank you for sharing those ideas and sharing your experience. Thanks, Candy. All right, well, thank you everybody for this discussion. I mean, it's kind of a big one because this just is, I mean, this is part of life. And so thank you for your heart for this and for being here and for helping make change in your church and in our churches, and like spread the word and seriously point people to shrinking toilets, and just kind of start some of those conversations. So this will be posted in the next day or 2 on keyministry.org if you just search for video roundtables, and our YouTube and Vimeo channels as well. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Brian, for your expertise. Thanks, everybody, for contributing and for asking questions and for participating. Dina, you're awesome. Thank you. And we will see you next month.